Okay, awesome. So raise your hand if you walked. Okay, raise your hand if you took some other unmentionable form of transportation. And then I took the bus. That's perfect. No, that's great. We multimodal is the answer. All right. So my name is Aaron Levine. I am a member of the board of directors of Madison Bikes. I recognize some of you. I see some new faces, which is really cool. So thanks for coming out. We're here to meet with Christof Spieler, who is our new-ish, but now Christof came in July, so
I'm in
seven,
the ish period.
7 or 8 months in. So just kind of wanted to get a chance for the bike community to get to know Christof a little bit now that Christof has had some time to get to know Madison and kind of get some first impressions. So we'll get a 20-minute or so presentation from Christoph where we'll
We're
get
not even here.
not even that long. That's okay. So however long, and then we'll take some time for some questions from anyone in the room or online. So we'll just do some kind of informal discussion and then we'll wrap things up and get everyone home before it's too horribly cold. So it's all welcome, Christoph Spieler.
Really happy to be here. And I will say this is not the technical, here is all the things Madison is doing about bikes presentation. If we wanted that, we would have Yang and we would have Kevin doing that presentation. Um, so this is more a big picture, sort of thinking towards the future kind of discussion. And I definitely want to use most of our time for Q&A and to actually hear from you because I want to get everyone's take on biking in Madison because this is my take on biking in Madison so far. So I spent most of my career as a consultant. I spent 17 years doing planning consulting out of Houston. During that time, I also served as a Houston Metro board member at Transit Center, taught transportation classes at Rice University, but fundamentally was doing consulting all over the country. Houston, obviously, being a very different place than Madison, though actually with some really great bike facilities, some of which I got to work on. Um, and came here for the prospect of being in the public sector and actually getting to be there from the beginning of an idea all the way through implementing a project and then continuing to tweak it once we see how the public uses it. And also, frankly, because when I flew up to interview, I kind of fell in love with the place. That was actually my first time in Madison when the mayor interviewed me for the job. I'm like, I would like being here. And it turns out I had good judgment in that because I've been thoroughly enjoying it. And I have been thoroughly enjoying the job. I get an amazing team. Just the caliber of people we have here, not just in the transportation department, but in all the other departments we work with, like planning and engineering, the degree that everyone works together, um, the openness to new ideas, the multimodal thinking. You have no idea how lucky you guys are to have a director of traffic engineering who bikes to work. Like that's what every city wants. We actually have. Um, and in the process of that, I have actually turned into a bike commuter. In Houston, I took the train to work. Here I've discovered I've got a really nice 10-minute bike ride to a really nice bike room. I also have the choice of walking. I also have the choice of transit. I definitely use both of those sometimes, but biked in this morning and I've figured out I can handle winter biking as long as there's no ice on the road. So cold, I'm cool with that. And it's been a really great way to get to know Madison and to get to know the Madison Bike Network at its best and at its worst, and also to see everybody else using the network. So it's been a really great 6 months of trying to get to know the city. And I can't say I know that much yet, but I've definitely seen a lot of the corners of the city. So what have I concluded so far about bikes in Madison? First of all, we have done a lot. This is a city that has been thinking about bikes pretty much as long as any other US city has, that has some of the best quality bike facilities you can find anywhere, that has a real culture of biking and a lot of people biking in a way that most places would love to see. So we're in a really good spot. And I'd say the highlight of that is the paths. The fact that we have a network of paths radiating in and out of downtown And the sheer number of people who feel comfortable on those paths and who use those paths and the degree to which those become parts of the neighborhood that they serve is really wonderful. And they're also just really great transportation facilities. I mean, hard to beat the Southwest Path for reliable, fast travel time at all times. Um, and it's a nice ride while you're doing it. But I just look at the map and squint. I'm seeing some holes there. And I think there's some directions where we have these great radial paths. There's some directions where the path network just kind of falls apart. Like Blackhawk Path really would like to be part of the campus path, and it isn't. And we all know how the cannonball just sort of comes to an end abruptly. If you look on the east side of Madison, right around Stoughton Road, you'll see we got a gigantic hole there. Um, we know this network works where we have it, but I think there are some real gaps in that network. And there's also gaps when it gets to on-street bikeways. So far, I'm finding to me the most alarming gaps in our bike network tend to actually be right around the campus. I will never ride in that lane again. I did it once. That is the last time I will ever do that. It's really funny because in the other direction, it's a great bike facility. But almost whichever direction you come to campus, you sort of run into gaps in the network. And that's actually probably the area where we have the highest demand. I also see some big gaps in other directions. The Northeast and the East are particularly problematic. Here you see the sort of where the Starkweather Creek path sort of dribbles to an end. And there's a lot of places you would probably want to go out in that direction, um, but there's no good way to get there. Um, and likewise on the east, like I said, once you get around sort of the Stoughton Road area, we got some really big gaps in the network down there. Some of these we are filling in. I think some of these will take a lot of imagination and some real ambition to do. We have paths where we have them because they were easy to build. So almost by definition, what's left is the hard stuff. The most precious resource we have, and this is one of my deepest beliefs about transportation planning, is street space. You can get a grant from the federal government to get more money. You can't get a grant from anybody to get more space. And here in downtown, that is 150-year-old surveying decisions that determine how much space we have to work with right now. That is the core of transportation planning, is what we want to do with that space. And that will always be the challenge, since anytime you design a street, you come up with a wish list, and that wish list is almost always longer than the right of way you have to play with. There's a lot we need to fit into these things. And one of the themes over and over is the competition between all of these different uses. We have a modal hierarchy. We believe in it. And I love that Transportation Commission, for example, actually believes in the modal hierarchy. A lot of cities say they have one. We actually practice it. But that doesn't solve all of our problems. Um, I mean, for one thing, we have a lot of lacking pedestrian facilities in a lot of part of the city. And in many cases, you can say, yeah, we could get rid of this parking, we could get rid of this traffic lane. But it might be that we actually need that room for pedestrians and not for bikes. And then there's other uses that we really have not thought through well enough. And to me, the top of that list is deliveries. As we're going into carb management, my conclusion has been that if I look at that hierarchy, deliveries aren't properly accounted for in that hierarchy. Because you can't take a street or a neighborhood, a street and the surrounding cross streets, and say there is no delivery spaces here. As the residents and the businesses on those streets will simply not be able to function, or more pragmatically speaking, that UPS truck is going to be in the bike lane. So we have to think about how we design and keep all of those things working. And I think we're going to try to develop better standards on some of that. And often, as we work, we are making decisions between good now and perfect later. If we had unlimited money and we had unlimited space, we could do some great stuff. I would love to see a design charrette on the hairball right here. I mean, it's part of my daily bike commute. I'm actually kind of surprised it's not nearly as bad a bike commute as you would think it would be by looking at the pictures, but this is not a great intersection. Like nobody has ever said, you know what would make this intersection better? Let's run a freight train diagonally through the middle of it. It's worth remembering that's a historical improvement because there used to be two freight rail lines running diagonally through this middle of this intersection, which actually crossed in the middle of the intersection. So historically, we're doing better than we were, but there's no way you can point to this and say, this is a great intersection. But nevertheless, the last round of improvements here made it a much better intersection than it was before. And I think that's often what we're faced with. We can map out what might the perfect world look like here. I can draw out some bridges here, maybe a roadway underpass. I can come up with I can figure out how to spend like $500 million here. Um, but oftentimes the question is, what can we do now that will move us further along, not what is the perfect thing we can do eventually. And one of the most important points there to me is that street space point. Often the thing I am most worried about is reserving street space. So if you give me a chance to do a bike lane now and use fairly cheap materials and paint and delimiters, we are still reserving the space for that bike lane, and we can upgrade to those concrete curbs later. And sometimes that is the most valuable thing we can do, just grab the space. We are not designing for us. If we rated everybody in this room on the scale on the different types of bicyclists, I imagine we get a lot of fearlesses. We get some enthused and confident. We really would not get a lot of the people who are interested but concerned. They're probably not joining bike organizations. And if we want more people biking, we need everybody to feel comfortable biking. And I think that's something all of us have to remember when we're thinking about bike facilities. It is not about whether we feel comfortable riding down that street, because if we feel comfortable, that's great, but it means we have an increased number of people biking. We want to make bikes a bigger part of the transportation system. We have to take the people who aren't comfortable right now and make them feel comfortable. And that takes a lot of different thinking about what bike facilities look like. And I think sometimes we actually get pushback from some bike riders who are like, it's going to be a little too slow for me. And I'm okay with that if we then a whole bunch of new people feel comfortable riding. So I always want us to keep in mind that we're not the target audience. Everybody in this room is going to bike anyway. But how can we get more people biking? Every year we have new riders. Every freshman class at the university is a new set of potential bike riders. Everyone who takes a job at Epic and moves to town is a potential new bike rider. And so this isn't about building a network for the people who are already here. It's building a network that will keep encouraging people when they move here to make that decision to get that bike, to make that decision not to get a car. And that's who we are designing for, which means that often I'm also thinking about first-time riders. It's a little confusing out there sometimes. I mean, I've been sort of exploring the network, and sometimes I'll find this like great thing that I had no idea was there. It's like I just unlocked the secret key to this neighborhood, and I didn't know it existed. Like that diagonal crossing on Willie Street that gets you to the Cap City path. Like that is so much better than staying on the Cap City path, but I had to like I did it the wrong way a couple times before I finally like, what happens if I turn left here? Um, and if you look at our bus network, we have route numbers. We have signs at the stops that tell you what that route is. We have a map that maps it out for you. If you drive, we started numbering highways a very long time ago, and it has made things a lot easier. I don't think we brought that kind of clarity to our bike network. Actually, working with the TE team, and we pulled up a map of names of bike paths according to the official MPO GIS. And like we're confused internally about what these paths are called. And like I didn't know that the Southwest Path abruptly turns into the Southwest Path Spur. I've written it many times. I didn't realize I was getting on a different path when I crossed this imaginary line, but according to the GIS, I am. So I think there's a lot of work to do of making this network easier to navigate and figuring out how to introduce new riders to the network. That new UW student, how do they figure out how to live in this city on a bike? And if you're going to tell me word of mouth, sure, that helps. But, not every kid has the right friends who have figured out what grocery store is easiest to bike to. So how can we make that easier on everybody? So what are we doing? It's been amazing taking this job because I got parachuted into the midst of a bunch of really interesting projects that were already underway, um, and some decisions that really matter. Possibly the most important bike decision we are facing right now is actually South Stoughton Road. That's not a bike project, it's a highway project. But if you're trying to bike on that side of town, this is your biggest obstacle right now. I have no idea what they were thinking when they designed these intersections. Like, I don't think this works for cars, but I biked across this because, that's my drone shot. So I biked out there to get it. I don't ever want to bike across that again. Um, I think South Stoughton could be a boulevard that completely transforms the neighborhood it's in. That becomes the main street for that side of the lake. Um, and I think it could include some great bike facilities, both for riding along it and crossing it. Like, can imagine a middle with a path here that connects into the Cap City Trail. So we are doing that thinking. We are sitting down with WISDOT and saying, what do the bike facilities look like here? And taking our in-house bike design talents and going to follow this through with things like intersection design. That said, part of WISDOT is excited about that, and part of WISDOT is probably not so excited about that, and would very much love to turn this into something that looks more like a freeway. And that decision hasn't been made yet, and how the public weighs in on that decision matters a lot. We're also looking at the Beltline. And the Beltline's interesting because it actually was built before most of the neighborhoods around it. Good, they didn't build those neighborhoods to do it. But in the process, they created something that became a barrier between neighborhoods as neighborhoods developed around it. And that matters a lot for traffic. We're funneling a lot of traffic through very few intersections. And at some point, the traffic signal engineers run out of tricks, and we simply can't make those intersections work because we're compressing everything into the few crossings that exist. And it matters a lot for bikes because this is a huge barrier for biking. In the places where there are bridges over it, it isn't. But there are long gaps between those bridges. And there's also sections where the surrounding roadway network is so disconnected that following the path of the Beltline may be the best way to make some of those connections. So we are going to give WISDOT some very detailed comments. I think they've done some very clever design thinking. I think there are some very good ideas in the PEL. We're also about to pass a resolution saying that there shouldn't be lane expansion here and there shouldn't be interchange expansion here. And definitely encourage everyone to that will be at a common council next week. We have our Vision Zero effort, which is very well staffed with some very smart and creative planners and engineers. And we are able to implement projects very readily. I think this is actually one of our strengths, is that we can identify, here is an intersection that doesn't work well, here's a crossing that doesn't work well, and really think about how we make that safer. We are about to start curb management, which I think will touch bikes in a lot of ways. This is how we sort out how we use the curb. Is it transit? Is it delivery? Is it parking? Is it bikes? Is it street cafes? And this is a plan you're going to hear a lot about as we get into it this year. We have been in the midst of mapping out the All Ages and Abilities Network. Um, this is the network we want to get to in the future. I think it's going to lead us to a whole nother exercise of thinking about what the priorities are for that network. How much do each of these connections matter? Which do we need to do when? Which can also lead us into thinking about the priorities for capital improvement projects. It's really interesting. In Madison, like in a lot of cities, a lot of our bike network park planning is driven by sewer pipes. Because when a street needs to be rebuilt because the utilities that are underneath, you have to rip up the whole pavement. So at that point, you have a chance to rethink the street. That's great. Every one of those opportunities is a chance to make a street better. And without spending money, we wouldn't have spent otherwise. But if our bike network consists only of the streets that had outdated sewer pipes underneath them, it's probably not a well-connected network. So we can think more about how we prioritize within that. Kicking off the downtown plan, and the downtown plan obviously covers a lot of things. It covers land use, it covers park space, but it is also a chance to rethink downtown streets. And again, that's one of our gaps. Like Wilson Street, I think has been transformative. I didn't know Madison before the Wilson Street Bikeway, but I now use it all the time and try to imagine what it was like without that connection. But that's kind of the only connection of its kind coming in. Like I've done the like you bike on State Street, you get to Capitol Square, and like, what do I do now? So this is a chance to really rethink that. And I think downtown is one of the places where we actually have street space to spare. That if you look at how much traffic there is on some of these streets, how much right of way there is on some of these streets, I think there is actually some real room to rethink those. This is further off in the future, but we are starting to think about our next transportation plan and really thinking about how all of these modes come together. That's more a like 2027-ish project. But we're starting to lay the groundwork for that. It's really funny to come into this position. One of the problems we have is that a lot of our master plans got finished. Like almost everything in our transit master plan has been done. So the question is, what is the next thing? And we actually don't know that answer. And one of the things I keep saying is, where are the big ideas? In a place that is growing as fast as Madison is, we have room to do some big things, some radical things. BRT was a big idea. The State Street Mall was a big idea. Monona Terrace was a big idea. What are our next big ideas? What are the big transformational moves that really change Madison? And that's what the thought I want to leave everybody with. If you think about our modal split for walking, biking, actually been steady for quite a while, kind of plateaued on bike mode split. Obviously ups and downs through the pandemic, but overall, got a lot of room to grow here. And my question to everybody would be, what would it take? What would it take to double bike ridership here? What would it take to see a steady increase in ridership year after year? What would it take to triple, quadruple bike ridership in Madison? Because we ought to be thinking about what those things look like. What are the projects we need to be laying the groundwork for right now that would actually be transformational? And I haven't heard a lot of those answers. And I'd say there's room for some really big thinking here. So with that, how to contact me, et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm interested in your Q&A. But there is a price for asking a question. If you ask a question, you first have to tell me something I need to know about biking in Madison. So who wants to go first?
Thanks, Christian. Really excited to see kind of the thing you're talking through here. I think one thing that in your presentation you talked about kind of like the ask of like things to know about biking Madison. I feel like there's points where there's like asymmetry depending on the direction of like the availability. So I go from the north side to Middleton every day to go to work, and getting to work's really easy. And I actually go down University, and I feel like I was surprised to hear you say that wasn't like didn't feel good, because I feel like that's one of the safer parts of my ride is going down University. But then coming back, like there's a lot of points of friction transitioning from that like west to east side. Kind of getting into like you either have to cross John Nolan or the double slip lane on Broome Street, I think it is. So the kind of the question I have is, what's the like you've seen like a lot of stuff we're doing for community advocacy and input. Like what do you think we should be doing better or differently? And then also like what's the city's priorities in terms of like managing all of the kind of like feedback you get in terms of like safety or like new paths or all that stuff? Like how do you, I know it's a bigger question, but
I mean, that is one of the hardest things because what I love about Madison is we get a lot of feedback. Um, but how feedback translates into priorities is often the hardest part. Um, I mean, one thing I'll say is I do believe in data. I think one of the things we've learned is if we listen purely to feedback we get, it will actually be an inequitable result because the people who have the time to give us feedback will be heard. The people who have the confidence that their voices will be heard will speak up. The people who don't believe they will be listened to won't. So part of this is data. And one of the things we're really trying to dig into is what data do we have? And one of the things I love about some new bike and ped planning efforts is they're actually trying to find new ways to measure things that will help us do that prioritizing. But and that feedback matters to us a lot. And sometimes it will point us to stuff that isn't obvious. And I think your example of like, this is easy one way, but hard the other. Sometimes the thing that makes a bike trip is like one block that doesn't work. It's good for us to know what that block is. So I would say that kind of very specific feedback is very useful. My other tip for anyone ever giving feedback to a public agency is be nice. Like, if your feedback is your stupid bike planners clearly don't know how streets work, you might get a little less attention from those bike planners than if you come at it with a thoughtful and reasoned and documented kind of approach. But yes, this like how do we prioritize? I think that's actually a huge challenge for us because there are a lot of things we can do and we can't do them all at once.
Well, the thing I'll tell you that you might not know about is the Wilson Street bike path over the Capitol Pump. That was first proposed in 1990 and mid-1990s when they were building the Sonoma Convention Center. And they did provide a way to keep the Lakeshore path open during the entire construction. We didn't get it then. It took like 30 years longer.
Yes.
My question is, certain newspaper editors are not liking all of the new bike lanes and claim we're discriminating against drivers and whatnot. Have you had contact with them and try and educate them about some of these things? There just seems to be in a different century.
I mean, frankly, I think you guys will probably be more effective at educating newspapers than we will be. I mean, we very much talk to the media and explain why we're doing what we're doing and so forth. But I do think that often it's very easy to read projects as city bureaucrats versus the community. And if the members of the community that are heard are all on one side of things, that is going to be the story in the paper. And ultimately, I think the most valuable thing on anything is just the public speaking up. And that includes the public speaking up to the newspaper and saying, have you thought about? I mean, I'll say here in Madison, you guys have an amazingly supportive political climate. Like, there's the political support to do all sorts of things. And I am seeing a city leadership, Common Council, Transportation Commission, definitely mayor, who very much believe in the policies that we have and will stick to those policies. Don't take that for granted. That is a rare thing. And we're getting lots of good things done as a result. So I think it's also possible to overstate the level of opposition we have to bike facilities. I mean, it's important for everybody to be heard on every project and so forth. But I don't think that's our biggest challenge. I think we actually have the political support to do lots of good things if we can figure out what we need to do.
First, the factoid is the Windra Creek underpass under John Nolan Drive is built on the skeleton of old bridge infrastructure at the suggestion of a member of the public. the city had planned to do a grade crossing there. And it worked out so well that the city did it again on the Yahara River with East Washington. So
I bet you could tell it doesn't meet all the standards that we would normally.
But they had the old skeleton. It's cheap and it worked.
Yes.
Question is, you had a slide showing the new bicyclists coming in. Well,
Yes.
new bicyclists can now do 20 miles an hour with just a push of their thumb.
Yes.
And they do. And so that kind of, you know, the city has had at least 3 public sessions on, things like path etiquette.
Right.
And complaints about speeds and being passed and overtaken, walking speeds of 3 miles an hour, casual bikers at 12 miles an hour, commuters at 20 miles an hour, and then some speeding
Yes.
much faster. That's too many speeds. I think everyone agrees with too many speeds. But some of the changes in Madison have been to move everything to a kind of a slow path. And it seems like that's kind of going against the way the industry is going with these fast e-bikes that people are using to commute longer distances. There's one guy I've talked to who works at Epic. He said he would not be able to bike to Epic if it wasn't for his e-bike power. And I can understand that. So, we're kind of torn. And I kind of get your thoughts on that. I know it's a big issue, but what do you think about catering to this sort of mid-speed commuting transportation e-bike community, in addition to the safe, calm, encourage people to bike?
Yeah, I mean, my bike's actually an e-bike, and I think e-bikes are one of the best things that's happened to biking in a long time. I think it extends the range that people will ride. I think it extends some of the conditions people will ride in. Those headwinds suddenly are not a big deal if you got an electric motor backing you up. And I think it extends the people who will ride. And that includes, I think it's a great device for a lot of people with disabilities who would not be riding otherwise. It's a great device for senior citizens who might not have the power. I actually think e-bikes are transformative, and we should make the space for them and make the room for them. Unfortunately, I think we've inherited a system where there is a great deal of confusion about what an e-bike is. An e-moto that can go 50 miles per hour is not an e-bike, it's a motorcycle. And I think that is not clear at all. Even when you see the reportings on it, most of the time when you actually see like e-bike accident, no, it was a motorcycle. And sometimes it had nothing to do with being an electric bike. Like if you get T-boned by a car, that did not happen because you were on an e-bike. So I think that I really want to make sure we make room for e-bikes. We've always had some level of speed issue. Those people on the carbon framed bike in the spandex have always been riding faster than the guy in the cruiser bike in the hoodie. Like we've always had that. And on our bikes, we've always had pedestrians alongside those. So the speed differential is not actually a new thing. It's just a more extreme thing. I am always also ready to caution us to look at the actual data, because so far we're seeing a lot more anecdotal stories about this as a danger than we are seeing actual data about it as a danger. If you look at the data, the thing that's really dangerous is SUVs, not e-bikes. So I don't want to overreact because e-bikes are new. But I think there's actually quite a lot we can do. And for example, one of the things I would tend to think we want to evolve towards is some of the busier paths actually being 2 paths. That there is a bike path and there is a pedestrian path. And the kid on a bike might actually use the pedestrian path instead of the bike path. Like we don't have to be too adamant about that, but simply making the room so that people can easily pass each other. My general feeling is some of the nicest and politest people I interact with are people on bikes and on foot. Way, way more thoughtful than drivers in terms of interacting with each other. So I think if we give the space where everybody can find their space, that helps. I think education campaigns, signage play a role. But I think some of this is just a space issue, and part of the reason we're seeing the conflicts is we just don't have enough space for everybody. And that's something we can look at. It's not always easy. You look at the Southwest Path, we definitely can't widen the entire length of it without spending some real money, but maybe we can widen segments of it. And when we build new paths, we can be thinking about this. So that's my thoughts. I think it will continue to be a difficult conundrum. But I also think like we are seeing these complaints on the Southwest Path because the Southwest Path is a very different kind of facility. It's actually a facility that is wonderful to ride fast on because it's got long stretches with no intersections. It's got a long downgrade. Like I know why people are riding fast there. And if you put that same person on a bike on Wilson Street, they are not going to ride the same way simply because of the frequency of intersections. So I don't think this is I do think that there are some contexts in which this is a more prominent issue, and we can perhaps focus more on those contexts.
You may know this already, but I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, they improved they dug up the west side of Monroe Street, and we all had charrettes and stuff. And they did not put any bike infrastructure in. And I ride down along there all the time, and it's just felt like such a missed opportunity. Even if they had just taken one way each way with the turn in the middle, I can't remember what that's called.
Twiddle.
Thank you.
2-way left turn lane.
Yeah. I was assuming they'd at least do that, but no. So you're riding on the sidewalk or as my friends will not ride with me over there. I'm pretty confident most anywhere, but my friends won't go with me there. Anyway, now we're doing so that was that. Here's my question. We're doing Regent Street. How can you not do that again? Don't have that happen again. Now, I think there's a lot more interest in Region and making it a pedestrianized street more than because it's not at all. It's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And I think there is interest in that, but we just can't keep these, park here, but lane here at this time of night and the 4 lanes and everybody's crisscrossing and it's just a nightmare.
Yeah. No, I think you are generally seeing a pattern of us like trying to simplify streets. I think that's definitely something you're pointing to. Like the Willie Street pilot is an example of that, of like, maybe can just be parking all the time, and maybe actually everyone's better off if it's parking all the time. I think Regent Street is a really good example of the challenge. It's a right of way that is not wide enough to do everything we would hope it would do. It is a vital link in the roadway network. It makes a connection not a lot of other streets make in a part of town with a really high demand. It's got an increasing amount of density on it, which means the amount of deliveries and so forth are going up. It has, like you said, some really lousy sidewalks today in a place where pedestrian activity is going up. And that leads to some unavoidable trade-offs. And I think, if you pay attention to our modal hierarchy, pedestrians are at the top of that hierarchy. So I think it makes a lot of sense to ask first, what do we need in terms of pedestrian space? I also think that when we think about bike networks, there is a hierarchy to bike networks. And sometimes we can say, we have a parallel street, we have a nearby path that can serve the longer trips. And in that case, we're starting to ask the question of what can we do on the street so that if you're on a bike, you can get to all of the places on the street, but not necessarily ride along the street. And sometimes that is the answer. And sometimes some shared bike pedestrian facilities are the answer there. So this is the challenge on Regent Street. And I think that one of the things I will say is when you see public meeting presentations, when you see transportation committee presentations on these projects, the staff is being very straightforward on what those challenges are. Like we are being very honest about those shortcomings and about hard decisions. And I do not envy our street designers, do not envy Transportation Commission when it comes to making some of these choices.
Well, I will say the only thing that gets my friends out of their cars, and I pay attention to that, is friction. If they can drive downtown and park for free, they will not think of any other way to do it.
Yeah.
And if they think it's fast to go on Monroe Street, that's what they'll do, and it's fast to go on Region. People will get out of their cars if it's more convenient to take the transit or the bike or walk.
Yeah.
I'm preaching to the choir.
No, I agree with you. And also, I think there's sometimes we have the tendency to have this discussion and say, maybe this street isn't the street the bikes need to be on, and then not follow up by improving the other streets the bikes do need to be on. So that's also a discussion we're having repeatedly. If there's a parallel route and it's a good direct parallel route, let's also do the improvements on that parallel route. And I think that's something I sometimes see cities completely miss.
I'll follow up with that with the case where Madison just failed to do that. So the bike path on Seago does not connect to University because, quote, that's going to be taken care of when we redo Midvale. Guess what?
Yes.
So can you please connect Seago to University now? Since
We need to connect CO to University. So,
I don't understand why the bus wanted to be on the right. Like, it seems like it should left to left. Like, it should be in the left lane and then take the right turn from the left lane. And then you could continue the bike.
well, now we're in a level of design detail where we need to pull up Google Maps. But this is actually, like I said, this is the kind of comment which is incredibly useful. And one of the things we're really trying to do, part of the point of the All Ages and Abilities Plan, is actually to connect out that complete network. Because what I don't want to do, which has happened plenty of times in the past, like you said, is build a segment of path that doesn't connect to anything, not know how it's going to connect. And sometimes I think we have the chance to sort of build some cheaper temporary facilities to make some of those connections. I mean, the Midvale project is, I've been in the middle of that, and it's a very frustrating situation because I think in the end, no way to do deliveries and parking on Midvale was not a plausible answer. And when we rebuilt the street, we have the chance to actually have a reasonable amount of parking on the street and a very high quality bike facility, but it takes rebuilding the street, which is why the conclusion we ended up coming to is we'd rather rebuild sooner and patch now than spend the money to repave an entire street to end up with something that we know is not the facility we actually want and something that we know will not work. And I want to make sure of that too, that when we're drawing lines on maps, we think about what the reality of those lines are, because it's also really unfair to do a plan and say, hey, this is our bike going to be our bike corridor without thinking through how feasible is it to do that and what level of construction will be required to do that. So I also don't want to be out there sort of doing a master plan that shows a corridor as a high priority bike corridor. And then when we get to the street design, completely rethink that again, because that network planning should be reflected in that street design.
I forgot my fact, which is I wanted to go downtown with a friend who worked at the state transportation building.
Yes.
Her plan was that we would go I was going to meet her at state transportation, and we would go to the Southwest commuter path to get downtown because there's no safe way other than that. And I showed her a couple paths and she said, those are not safe ways. I mean, we really do need those connections.
Yeah, that connection is one, I mean, I don't know. Arguably the best bike connection there is wheel your bike on the BRT. I think, like I said, I think that is actually one of our real gaps. And there are some secret ways you can sneak through the neighborhoods that are worth making clear to people, but I think there is some infrastructure we need over there. I mean, one of the other questions I love asking is the freeway section of Campus Drive. What should that look like in the future?
That should be at grade with connections to the neighborhood.
And I actually proposed that once.
That is my neighborhood. I've been dreaming about that for a long time.
It's that biker there today on Campus Drive.
It's
You know, the history on that.
Lanes.
You know the history on that.
What?
You know the history on that. That was supposed to be the start of an interstate going through the center of it.
Yeah, no, I've dug through like the I mean, that to me is the best decision that ever got made in Madison in terms of transportation, was the decision not to build 3 freeways across the isthmus. Like,
It's also supposed to be.
yes. And right about here would have been a highway interchange between the Johnson Street Freeway and the John Nolan Freeway. So and one of the things I'm always thinking when we're having these meetings is I really want us to make decisions that the next generation will not regret us making.
All right, this is an unofficial tip. So you know where the Southwest Path crosses the Monroe and Regent intersection, and there's like,
Oh, that goofy left turn.
yeah, you like get onto the island there. Now there's also the corresponding crosswalks here. Want to get through fast, just go on the walk signals on that other side. I didn't tell you that though, but you'll see a lot of people do it.
That when we have the money to rebuild that intersection,
Yeah,
I
just, like,
really
make it
look forward to it.
So I guess like the question is, are you familiar with the circulation plan in Ghent, Belgium?
I may be. I'm
It's
trying
like
to.
this thing where it was like a really big political issue where they're like, we're gonna basically like put traffic diverters everywhere to
So that it basically divides into quadrants, and if you're
Yeah,
driving, you
yeah,
can
yeah.
drive in, but you have to drive out the same way you came.
Yeah, so I don't know, if you're looking for big ideas, and diverters are a good way to still conserve street space. So how do you feel about diverters is my real question.
I mean, I actually think we have some of them that work very well. I mean, I generally love this idea of we make a bike boulevard by keeping through traffic off of it, and we use diverters to do that. And of course, I mean, we've got a couple ones that actually work incredibly well that I regularly bike through. I think there's room for more of that. And that's actually one of the Yang and I were actually talking earlier today about. I think one of the things we actually need to do more of is planning for cars. Because it's really kind of funny. We've ended up in a place where we do transit planning, we do ped bike planning, and we don't really do car planning. And by not doing it, we're actually failing to take advantage of some opportunities. And I think that idea of circulation is really important. And I think there are some parts of Madison where we can rethink how cars circulate in a way that would open up a lot of possibilities.
Would you say that in lieu of planning for cars, it's more the status quo of they should just be allowed everywhere?
Yes, exactly. Like by not planning for them, we are not questioning the way they work right now. And I think a really good example of that is one-way streets. If you only ever consider a street at a time, you will always have to take that existing traffic flow for granted because that one-way street is part of a network of streets that works in a certain way. If you actually step back and think about the network, maybe that shouldn't be a one-way street. But without the network thinking, we're never going to be able to ask that question.
So, I guess a factoid that you don't know is that when I was in college, which was a very long time ago, the right lane of University Avenue was buses, bikes, and right turns.
I didn't know about the right turn part of that. That's scary.
And there was a t-shirt, which I, to this day, regret I never bought, of a stick figure on a bike, you know, with the sort of leaning forward and the little sort of motion things behind it, and a bus bearing down on the bicyclist. And it said, "I survived the bike lane on University Avenue." So when I was in college, I rode in front of the buses on University Avenue. So it's a lot better than it used to be. So that's.
But it's a lot better in one direction.
Huh?
It's better in one direction.
That bus lane.
Right.
Used to be a bus lane until several people were hit by buses because they didn't look the correct way. And then they moved the buses over to Johnson Street, narrowed the lane, and made it into a lane. Yeah. But that's just my factoid so that I can ask you a question. The question is, what's the best way to interact with WISDOT to get them to stop considering just traffic flow and get them to fund some other pieces of the system.
I think those are two questions. You asked about consideration, you asked about funding. Consideration question, public comments. Encourage all the young people you know to become traffic engineers. Funding, that is the state legislature you're talking about. Wait, I mean, WISDOT.
Get them to think we need to rethink the system so that their planning is not just removing cars. I mean, we don't have, you know, I mean, we don't have an RTA. We talked about the Beltline and you said, well, all these crossovers, probably the state's not going to fund it. That's on the city. And, you know, they don't want to fund, they don't want to put a lot of money into bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Anytime we want to deal with a state highway, we have to get their permission to make major changes. Park Street, Blair, John Nolan, East Washington, all of that. How, I mean, and I know this is very theoretical because before I retired, I worked for an agent for a think tank that worked with state DOTs all over the country. But Wisconsin DOT is very much behind in that thinking. So how do we push them to move into the 21st century on transportation? That's the big question.
I will say WISDOT, like every large organization, is a mix of different people who think very differently. Like I've seen some really good thinking out of there. I've seen some really smart ideas out there. We've had some great workshops with them, just gathered around a table, plotting out ped bike networks. So I think part of this is we're talking transportation planning and traffic engineering is a profession that has been changing very quickly in a field that is somewhat resistant to change. Like engineers believe in their standards and there's, you know, if you make bad traffic engineering decisions, you kill people, which tends to make everybody cautious about change. And there is an ongoing change in how we think about designing roadways. And what you see in a lot of organizations is an organization that's partway through that change. Public pressure can definitely help move that. Political pressure can definitely help move that. But I will say a lot of the constraints I see WISDOT operating under are actually constraints that are coming from the state legislature, to some degree coming from the feds. Like what they are allowed to spend money on, what they are not allowed to spend money on, what tools they have for like the eminent domain rules are different if you're building a car lane than if you're building a bike lane. Like that comes from the state legislature and WISDOT is operating within that framework. And a lot of this stuff is political and the everybody at WISDOT is operating within the structure and the framework and the set of choices that they have. And then I think, you know, public input. Like I think a lot of times they're actually wanting to do the right thing and the public input helps them do that, gives them the justification for doing that. And so every time there is a study, we need to weigh in. And the other thing that is always important to remember about highways is once a line is drawn on the map, it's there. And so that's why things like a Pell study matter so much, because once a Pell study says this is the set of things we are studying, that becomes the set of things. And so you want to make sure the good stuff is included and the bad stuff isn't. And every time a highway is environmentally cleared, even if they don't have funding for it, assume it will get built. As that's the way highways tend to work. That thing will get put on the shelf and at some point the money's available. And then that thing that already got cleared, start the bidding, pull out the bulldozers. So being engaged in these planning processes is really important, which is why we at the city actually put a lot of energy into it. We put a lot of staff time into working with WSDOT. And I think we've had some real successes on that. Making headway on North Stoughton Road bike path, for example, through those continued conversations with WSDOT. And I found them generally very good to work with, but they are working within a larger framework.
I guess the other question is, so around our kind of the way we work in the city, we have like a really good team at the city building really good stuff. We have really good advocates, a lot of people in the room. I guess my question is, do you think we're doing enough? And if not, what do you think we can do to improve the synergy between like the public and the city to like get the best possible outcome?
Oh, there's so many potential answers to that. I mean, I think open communications, informal communications are very valuable. I think, and that includes with council members, that includes with commission members. I actually think, my strongest answer to that is geographic. I think that right now in central Madison, we have a lot of synergy, we have a lot of support, we have a lot of good ideas. The further you get out from the core, the more you leave the old streetcar neighborhoods and go to post-war development, the less community infrastructure there is, the less advocacy I see, the less of a vision I see. And these are actually, I think, the most important places to work on. Like, we got some great bike facilities on the isthmus, but also a bunch of the isthmus is just easy to bike on with no intervention whatsoever. That isn't true when you get further out. When you're around Sherman and Packers and place like that, like that's a lot harder out there. But we also don't have the advocates paying attention to those places. We also don't have the community organization that we see in places like Marquette. And that to me is actually the biggest hole that could be filled. Like, do the grassroots work on the ground in all of those neighborhoods?
I do live on the north side. I've been trying to build more people up there and be like, let's get some better stuff. But here things are lying.
Another factoid, talked about lines don't get erased. So a year and a half ago, a line in a planning document that had been there for 20 years got erased by neighbors who were resisting bicyclists. So anyway, some lines can get erased.
And it also depends on kind of lines. Transit lines are a lot easier to erase than freeway lines, I have found.
This was to the question of cars. Madison has historically, we have a number of streets like Regent Street that have rush hour parking, for example. And that's designed for people living in the suburbs or outskirts coming to work downtown. Well, we're inverted now. We have people living downtown. The state is closing the offices, moving it out. People live down here and they drive to Exact Sciences,
right,
and so forth. So those lanes are sort of almost backwards in some ways. And then with the Atwood Avenue construction, the city did a genius thing of making it asymmetric, saying, hey, let's just have permanently 2 lanes in one way and 1 lane the other. I think it should be 2 lanes out of the downtown and 1 lane in, slow the people coming in. But I understand the morning rush hour, really is 2 lanes in.
Right.
But working with traffic, it seems like that asymmetric design is working pretty well on Atwood and could be a model for a lot of these other roads like Monroe Street, certainly Regent Street, that are space constrained and get that extra lane. I'm kind of, this is, you could talk about cars and the importance of thinking about cars and so forth. And, what is rush hour? Where do we need the capacity?
Yes.
I'd love to get your kind of thoughts on how Madison's got a lot of experiments, a lot of different types of streets, and a lot of data. You probably have a lot of good insights there into what streets could look like and still handle the car load.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and this is the kind of thing I definitely have a lot to learn in a lot of those specifics. I think you're right. A couple of really key points. One is the pattern of traffic has definitely changed. And we're seeing this in a lot of ways. We also see this in transit boarding. We're seeing this in parking garage usage. We're often seeing our downtown parking garages peak for special events now, not for the 9 to 5 office job. And that opens up huge possibilities. Couple other things. I would say that historically we focus too much on rush hour in terms of traffic design. Like we concentrate our entire design of a street on like half an hour over the course of the day. And I'm generally more willing to put up with congestion in that half an hour if it will make the street work better at all of the other times. And the problem is focusing on that half hour often makes the street worse for all of the other times. Also, when it comes to parking, I think to me, one of the biggest concerns about parking that we don't talk enough about is legibility. Those like you can't park here for 2 hours in the morning, but then you can park here for 2 hours during the afternoon. You can park unlimited. And you're like, that kind of signage scares people. And these lanes that are sometimes traffic lanes and sometimes parking lanes are often not used to their full potential as parking lanes because people aren't comfortable parking there because they are worried they're getting it wrong. They also tend not to reach their full potential as traffic lanes because some people misread the signage and we have to send the tow trucks out. But by the time we tow the car, it's been blocking that lane for a while and somebody's still doing a drop off, even though they're not supposed to be doing a drop off. Like often those lanes, the capacity that the traffic model said that lane would have is not its actual capacity. So I think there's a lot to be said for taking streets and just simplifying them. And saying this is what this street will function like 24 hours a day. And you know, that's Willie Street. And I think there's other potentials like that. And that point you made, some streets are actually asymmetrical. Like we tend to assume all streets are symmetrical. Some streets for very specific reasons are actually asymmetrical. And let's go for it. Let's make them that way. So no, I think those are all very good points. And this is part of why I say like the downtown streets have such potential is our downtown traffic circulation is oversized. And you know, you can basically traffic engineers of the 50s had like 3 big tools for downtowns. First one was narrow the sidewalks. The second was one-way streets. And the third was this sort of off-peak parking, peak traffic lanes. And you see those all over the United States. And I think they all have distinct downsides. And we have a chance to rethink that and not take for granted that the way downtown worked in 1960 is the way downtown should work today.
I was trying to think what maybe we would have known for my factoid.
It doesn't have to be a fun factoid. It can just be like something I should know. Like well, what place do we need to fix, for example?
I guess one place you should fix is the Struck Canyon underpass.
Mm-hmm.
Agree with that?
Yes.
Say it again?
Struck Canyon underpass. Yeah, in the wintertime, there's ice there. And when it's not wintertime, there's condensation a lot. And I actually crashed there this year.
That's the one under the belt line, right?
Yeah.
That is WISDOT's.
You have big sore pipe.
WISDOT's plans. WISDOT's Beltline Pell includes the possibility of turning that into a roadway with a bike path in it.
Yeah.
So that may be a public comment you want to make.
Yeah, that would be good if they anticipate the traffic that's going to go on those roads and put bike facilities on those roads. Yeah. Anyway, my question and concern, I guess, is all the overpasses over the Beltline. I think you did a great job emphasizing that how important, how much of a fence the Beltline is and how important it is to get across to the other side. We live on the west side, far west. And so all those overpasses, underpasses are really important for us to get to doctors, businesses, get down to Verona, all kinds of places. So what are the barriers? I mean, I know that the DOT has a fairly long process for looking at all of that. Could you just go into a little bit of detail on what the barriers are and what the time frame might be to getting any of those happen? Because some of those have been on there for a long time.
So the Beltline studies a Pell with no construction funding attached. So at this point, there's no like roadmap from them on this is when we want to do this. What we're hearing from them is that this probably isn't one giant construction project. It's probably a series of things that get done over time with different priorities. I don't think they've formally said what those priorities are. Um, so I think there's a huge number of question marks around that. The other thing I will say is the challenges is some of the most obvious crossing locations turn out to be really hard to do. Independent of Wistow, we've been doing a study on Perry Street, which is just as blatantly obvious. We need that connection. There's like this whole isolated pocket without enough ways in and out. But nobody planned for that connection. The roadway right-of-ways on both sides of the street are narrow. There's intersections really close to the belt line. And all of the options our team has been sketching up all have real downsides. They disconnect other connections, they take property, and so I think on some of these beltline connections, we are going to end up finding that we wish there was a connection here, but given decades of decisions that have been made in that spot, the cost of creating that connection now, I don't mean monetary cost, but cost in terms of impacts on our transportation network, on businesses, on homes, may not be acceptable, which is a really frustrating answer. And it's one of those cases where you wish you had a time machine and laid out this road network correctly 70 years ago or whatever. But it is very hard to fix now. That's easier with ped bike than it is with roadway because roadway it's wider, it has more grade restrictions. You can't just do a little spiral at the end. But even some of the ped bike connections have real impacts there. And we're going to have to decide, is that impact acceptable? That impact is taking part of a parking lot, we might say, yeah, that's fine. But if that impact is wiping out an apartment complex, we might say, no, that's not fine. And one of the things I really appreciate about the Beltline study is it actually did the work to map out what these things could look like so that we can actually have that conversation.
Factoid, we actually had the money to put that overpass at Ferry Street. And due to politics, I was chair of the Ped Bike Motor Vehicle Commission at the time. And due to some politics behind Alder, they stole the money and used it for Todd Drive reconstruction.
And they did the Todd Drive wrong,
Yes.
so they're dangerous.
You were talking, and I appreciate you talking about how the development outside the core area, I'd like to talk about on the west side, that you get past Whitney Way and you have curvilinear hell, as I like to call it. Because you have streets every mile that get through.
Yeah.
And there's no quiet through streets that go long distances, and especially get you over the belt line.
Yeah.
And that came up with the Sauk Creek Greenway. And one of the reasons that could have connected up with something to get across the belt line. Kind of two-parter is one, that's the struggle I have, is trying to figure out ways to fix some of that curvilinear hell and get paths through there or neighborhood cut through. And there are some in that neighborhood, and getting them linked up is a problem. And the second part is you need to get some sort of path mapped out to get the proposed Junction Ridge overpass of the belt line higher priority so it gets built. I've been trying for 25 years to get that built. And I would have greatly appreciated that when I was working out Sauk Trails business park.
Yeah. No, and I'll say one of the things I really want to focus on in our network planning is actually finding ways to quantify the importance of connections, because we're always going to be in a situation where here's 30 bridges we can build. I would like a way to answer the question of which one of these bridges brings the most benefit to the network. And I don't know yet how to do that analysis, but I know we have people smart enough to figure it out. And so I definitely want to do more of that and really be able to identify the importance of some of these connections. With that, I think maybe one more question and then. I guess you've had two already. Okay.
We've got huge federal funding. There's a lot of sort of no expenses spared in the system. Have you thought about if we were to bid Plymouth Madison funding and maybe cutting some corners and so we could get another BRT?
Sorry, say the question again.
Have you thought about trying to make it a lower cost BRT system so that we could?
Oh,
do it
okay.
without federal funding?
I think, to me, it's actually one of the ways I think about transit is BRT, real BRT has a level of dedicated lanes. It has higher station amenities, et cetera, which I think are all useful. Like when I'm looking at our BRT line, I don't know what I would want to cut. Like I think the money that was spent for useful things. But then I think there's another question to ask, which is, what about our busiest bus routes? They don't all want to be BRT. I don't know that I would just take the C and make it all BRT. We don't need 3 sets of dedicated bus lanes going across the middle of the isthmus, probably, but every one of those could be better. And I think there's another level of project in which you take a local bus route, you do some stop consolidation, you do better amenities at every stop, you make sure that pad is big enough that backdoor boarding works, you do little segments of bus lanes in the most congested bits, you do transit signal priority. Like I think there's another kind of what is the best local bus route we can build. And I definitely like to see us do that. So that's on my agenda. We probably need more BRT too, but I think there's a lot of bus routes that would benefit from that kind of level of upgrade.
And frequency.
And yes.
Maybe follow up quickly on your previous question. I really want to point out, I go from the state DOT building to downtown a lot on bikes. I would think the best way to go would be crossing Old Middleton and Eau Claire using that RFB we built and collecting the path, the kind of the path by the golf course, and then connect to the Campbell Pass. So that's the one that I found most comfortable. But it's definitely that area is definitely it's on our radar. When I was intimately involved in the Sickle Road redesign project, adding the bike lane over there, taking away the parking, and adding the transit lane for the BRT stop. Actually, it took a lot to get there to get those done. For the intersection at the university, we're actually not just trying to connect to the on-street bike lanes there, because the on-street bike lane has very low usage right now, University Avenue. We want to do something better in the future, make a connection, and better yet, connect to the back path that further north. However, right now that's a state property. We couldn't cross over there. I also want to point out that when the Madison Yards, the whole development over there in the Whole Foods, that was being reviewed. That was oh gosh, that's about 8-9 years ago. I led a team, working with the developer a lot. So if you look at their first proposal, it's very car-centric. So no bike accommodations, no transit accommodations. So we put them really hard to get where we are today. One thing we really wanted is some kind of connection. They can find that either going on the Old University Avenue connect to the path on the north end. But over the process, we were threatened multiple times by the developer to sue us. So we couldn't get everything we wanted, but I think we got it. We got a lot. But that's something I think we should. That's definitely a problem area that we want to keep improving in the future, especially with the continued density building in that area. We want to we want to increase bike usage there. Yeah, we actually give them a target. The whole development, we want 30% of the trips generated by the huge development accommodated by non-driving mode. Yeah. And that's a single largest development project ever approved by the city. So a opportunities were there, but you're right. Yeah, that area definitely needs improvements.
No, and there's a whole world of working with developers that I haven't touched in this discussion, but where there's a lot of potential. I also think you just made me think of what would be a perfect um, what would be a perfect event, which is you have a panel of 4 experienced bicyclists and you give them all the same point A and point B, and you see what each of their preferred route would be. Because I think that would be really interesting on some connections. But anyway, I really appreciate everyone coming out and hope to talk to everyone a lot more in the future too.
All right, everybody, thanks so much for coming out. Christoph, thank you again. I think it's really cool that, as was mentioned, right, we have a city where we have the Director of Transportation and the Director of Traffic Engineering willing to come out to an event like this on a sub-zero January night. Like, it's really cool. So thank you, Christoph and Yang, for being here, and everyone else, really, right? Like, it is the advocates and the people in this room that do so much. So if you're not involved with Madison Bikes directly yet, we'd love for you to be. So Facebook, Instagram, Madison Bikes. We have some Madison Bikes information and product and paraphernalia right up front here. So if you would like any of that, please stop and grab it. Our next event is in 3 weeks, I think. February 13th is Winter Bike to Work Day, International Winter Bike to Work Day. So Christo, our Madison Bikes president, has been working on planning some nice events. So I know in the morning, Christo, at Law Park, correct?
Yep, near Machinery Row.
Yeah, near Machinery Row. Thanks, Lauren. Um, so they'll be helping. And then do we have an evening event?
Working draft 4 to 6.
Working draft from 4 to 6. So we'd love to see you out on your bike on February 13th for Winter Bike to Work Day. And let's have one more round of applause for Christoph here.